So we're here today to talk about the title of the session is The Urgency of Simplicity, to understand why it's important for brands, companies to be simple in a world that's kind of increasingly complex and social. I'm Russ Meyer, the Global Strategy and Insights Director for Siegel+Gale.
Justin Peters, Global Executive Creative Director.
Thomas Mueller, Global Director for Customer Experience.
So maybe the place we should start is, let's just try to start with a definition of simplicity. Thomas, you want to take a crack at it?
Sure. So one of the areas that I work a lot with is the digital side of the customer experience. So why don't I start from there? To me, when you look at the digital space, I would take all jargon away and say simplicity is when we create magic, when we literally remove all of the complexity and make incredibly complex pieces of technology like this thing so simple, it's wrapped in simplicity, and it allows you to be in touch with everything around you, be it content, be it people, be it location, and it is incredibly simple and understandable.
And as creative director, I would kind of add to that I think the impression that people think simplicity can bring to visuals in the design part of communications is that less is more. If you think about modernism, white space, the fewer elements, the clearer the communication. And I think as the world is getting more complex, we have to go much more towards storytelling and clarity in storytelling. So it's not about white space. It's about being efficient with the kinds of elements that you're working with, whether it's messaging, visuals, identity elements, navigation elements, that it's not necessarily less is more, it's better use of the tools that you have.
Yeah, so I'll try to build on your topic for both of you. So I thought this was an interesting question, so I went back to, we've got the Global Simplicity Index, which is a study we do of brands and how simple they are in the third year, and we're just getting ready to release the third year of that data. So I thought I'd look at, what are the questions we ask to help consumers judge brands on simplicity, and there were three characteristics that I thought perhaps were most useful, especially when you kind of look at the Venn diagram of simple and social, and they were, the characteristics were useful, is the brand useful, is the brand transparent or honest, and is the brand easy to understand. And I think for me, those metrics or those kind of definitions help me get under the surface of the magic is it useful, is it easy to navigate, is it easy to understand how to operate, and then the storytelling thing, can I connect something in me to something in it? Is it transparent or easy to understand as well?
Right, and there's that layer of time. How quickly can I connect with the message and be able to act on it?
Yeah, because I think, to me, one of the wrinkles is I think, like you said, less is more. I think people often think simplicity is about removing things, when I can think of experiences we all have that are fairly complex, but you could discuss them as simple because they're fairly intuitive, they're easy to understand, it feels more like magic than it feels like a challenge. So to me, that's the trick in simplicity, is it isn't just a definition of less, right? It's a little more complicated than that.
So that's an interesting point you raise around social, especially obviously within the light of this conference. Brands are moving from being social brands to social businesses. Where does the theme of complexity sit within that discussion, as the social dimension is right at the core of businesses?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would think, to me, one of the themes that connects social to simple is this idea of feedback, because the challenge is, first of all, if you're going to create a simple experience, you've got to know, is it simple for whom, right? And I think we can think of a lot of experiences that were simple for the company. So when United aggregated its technology onto the new to the Continental platform instead of the old United platform, it was simple. It's probably simple and easier for United, but from a user standpoint, much more complex, much more challenging. So for me, one of the connections between social and simplicity is this idea of feedback. How do you know whether what you're doing is achieving your goal? How do you know whether something is useful or easy to understand or transparent? So that, to me, that's a direct connection between the kinds of things you can do with social and how it impacts simplicity. I think it's a good question. Where does social fit in all of this?
There's something that's very relevant today, looking at election season, and how candidates as brands need to simplify their message. What's the hook? What's the sound bite? And it's interesting that it's such a social experience. These messages go out in the news cycle, and then people using Twitter and other social media kind of interpret those very simple soundbitey communications to make up, you know, a decision-making process. And you know, is that maybe one instance when simplicity gets in the way of clear communication decision-making? By simplifying somebody's platform to the point where it's a soundbite, are the people who need to make decisions on candidates not given enough information to really make an informed decision? You know, maybe that's a topic that's it's obviously really hot right now, but maybe there are other industries and that maybe simplicity could be maybe a deterrent to clarity.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thomas, thoughts?
You know, I mean, this whole, it's funny that you mentioned that. I thought about that this weekend, the difference between what was the takeaway from the vice presidential campaign, mostly in social media. It was about the smirk, the laugh, the teeth, as opposed to how much decision-making, to your point, Justin, is actually being made in terms of folks taking the time and actually looking at the platform or the salient points that were made at each of the big conventions. And then earlier in the season, when one of the candidates, very early during the primaries, introduced his 56-point program to turning the country around versus the attention span of 140 characters. Big space in between.
Right, and I think that's where social media becomes so much more important, that if a candidate needs to put one message, you know, just a couple of words, and people need to understand from that very simplistic message that defines them for that moment, that the social media side of it needs to make all that data that's very important in decision making more accessible. So it's that it becomes the back end that's almost more important than what the candidate is actually giving to you.
Yeah, maybe a different way to think about it than back end, front end is actually depth of information, because I don't know that I can think of an experience that I would say I'd rather were more complex than less complex, but there is this situation going on now where folks want the ability to customize just about everything, which you could argue is a reaction to simplicity. I don't want just one thing. I want one thing the way that I want it, and that might involve 24 decisions regarding if it's shoes, color of laces, and color of texture of materials. But I do think one powerful use for simplicity is to be able to understand a point at the top, but be able to allow people to drill down to get to a level of complexity they're comfortable with. And so that's part of simplicity too, is there's not one right answer. What's simple for my mom when it comes to banking might be very different than what's simple for me. For me, it's great to snap a picture of a check. This is where it's a little like magic, right? To snap a picture of a check, it's automatically deposited. I don't have to take that physical piece of paper to the bank. It's sort of magical. That's simpler for me, but for my mother, it would be incredibly complex because she doesn't do online banking, she doesn't have a phone. So to force her into that is actually making the situation more complex for her. So I think some of this is how do we allow folks to get it at the top level if they want it, but be able to drill down into whether it's a candidate's platform or the customizability of something. How do we provide that flexibility in a way that's kind of intuitive and magical? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So would you be saying simplicity is possible in an always-on world, both for brand managers, for folks on the inside of a brand, of a company, versus what's the simplicity for the end user?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think it's possible. The question is, how can you, in some ways, align those things? How can decisions that are made from a simplicity standpoint internally provide a benefit, again, to a customer that's useful or transparent or easier to understand? So I think about like Southwest. So Southwest is standardized on one plane. From an operation standpoint, an efficiency standpoint, incredibly efficient, right? They can turn the planes around faster, less cleanup time, less parts, fewer mechanics. Like there's a whole host of internal benefits. But there's actually some useful benefits from a customer standpoint. So more frequent flights, faster loading and unloading. So the question is, how can we make decisions internally that actually pay out for a simpler benefit to a user? Like that, to me, is the magic, as opposed to making the decision for one that impacts negatively on the other, like the United and their information systems.
Right, and I would say a big piece of their success always has been aligning every benefit for that flyer with every action the flight attendants and pretty much everybody at Southwest internally takes. Simple color coding that really signifies and organizes the experience. So very much a service design approach to making sure everything in front of the stage for the consumer is very, very simply aligned with every interaction on the inside.
Yeah, and I think that probably, there's probably another part of the definition of simplicity has to be like simplicity, clarity of purpose, and being clear on kind of who are the people that we're talking to. I think Southwest is a good example of that too. They're all clear on what they stand for, and they're clear on who the people are that they're serving, and that's part of simplicity as well. I think if you don't have at your core your clear purpose, and you're not clear on what the priority is for
right.
who you're serving, you're bound to wind up creating situations that aren't as simple as they could be.
And it gives a point of differentiation that's really clear to the consumer when you're looking at Southwest and the experience that they provide in comparison with other airlines or other providers of any service. The level of simplicity that allows you to get to the information and act upon it is a decision driver.
Right.
So it's absolutely critical to have experiences that are driven by simplicity to not only gain new customers but to retain them over time.
Yeah, but in some ways the challenge is how do you constantly be revisiting what simple is against your purpose?
Can you keep making it simpler? That's
a
big
right,
question.
Right, because I think about it, like, George Eastman, who started Kodak at one time, said he wanted photography to be as convenient as a pencil. And that's a pretty powerful thing, and I think they despite where they are today, I think they were a powerful brand for many decades. The challenge is, photography on the iPhone has become as simple as a pencil. They just didn't, in some ways, they didn't stick to their idea and constantly revisit how can they reinvent what convenient or simple means.
So where do you think that's gotten us? What's the takeaway from that?
I mean, one thing that I think most clients, right, that come to offices, regardless where it is, they're asking for, what are the 3 things I can start tomorrow? How do I create an urgency around simplicity within my team, within the product that I own? Let's spell out three things that I take away to really create an immediate urgency around simplicity. What would be your number 1 item, Russ?
That's a good. So I would say my number 1 item would be to accept the reality that consumers' perceptions of simplicity in one category are impacting their perceptions of your brand. So why I think Amazon is simple is how I think you should be simple, even though I might not compete with you directly.
Listen, iterate, measure, and iterate.
Yeah, and for me, it's know that there are, to your point, navigating the layers. If the top layer is really simple and accessible and gets you into the conversation, that you need to be able to navigate to the levels of deeper information so you can make decisions. Never make a decision on the simplest level of any issue.
Great.
All right.
So this has been the urgency of simplicity. Thanks for tuning in.
Excellent. That's